Right, so questioning continues here of Tristan Mullis, the now 14-year-old son of Todd and Amy Mullis. We heard him talk about how he discovered his mother's body in the family shed. I want to bring in my guest live with us this hour via Skype, trial attorney Terri Austin. Terri, let me ask you, what do you make of this testimony so far? Certainly Tristan talked about how this upset him very much and made him very anxious, although I would say, do you think we heard a lot of emotion so far in his testimony?
I think he has been extremely cool, calm, and collected, and that concerns me a bit. If I'm on the jury, what I'm thinking right now is that this young boy is testifying on behalf of his father, and he's saying whatever he needs to say to make it better for his father. He said, there are some inconsistencies here about whether or not he was ever alone, with the dad when the dad went out at some point, and originally he testified that he was with his father the whole time. And, now apparently there's some time that, that's not the case. And, the father slept on the couch and, there are just some holes in his story. I think the prosecution is doing an excellent job, though. She's not berating him, but she's getting some information out here that I think is going to help her case.
Yeah, I mean, certainly an interesting ethical dilemma, a case like this where you have the child of both the victim and the defendant, and then that child forced to testify or in the case and, perhaps, as you said, trying to protect his dad in his testimony. I do want to talk about that more as this trial continues, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with much more live from Iowa right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Stacey Delacat. Now, direct questioning of the last witness we had on the stand, Tristan Mullis, just wrapped up as we were in the break, and the judge opted to take a lunch break before the cross-examination begins. Now, again, this was some interesting and arguably pretty key testimony here because 14-year-old Tristan was 13 at the time his mother was found dead, is the one who discovered her body in the shed. Apparently, the narrative goes that Todd Mullis, remember, he's charged with her murder, asked her to go get a pet carrier from this shed. When Tristan, the son, went to go check on her, he found her, he said, on the floor of the shed, actually on her hands and knees, face down with this rake, this corn rake impaled into her back. He said she was bleeding. He screamed for his father. They rushed her to the hospital, and he described the events that followed. Now, Terri Austin is my guest, joining us live via Skype, and just before the break, we were talking about kind of the ethical dilemmas and in a case like this where a child has to testify against his parent when the other parent is the victim and has been murdered. And Terri, your opinion was that he was very cool, calm, and collected. Some of the details weren't lining up, and it seemed perhaps he was saying whatever he had to say to protect his dad, right?
That's exactly right, Stacey. I think that the prosecution was doing a great job with the questioning. She was getting her information out, but at the same time, she wasn't attacking him. It's a very delicate questioning. And I think she walked a fine line and got the information she needed regarding the inconsistencies in his testimony.
Yeah, let's go back to some of those. I mean, one of the last things that she sort of had a long list of questions about was the iPad. Did you ever use your dad's iPad? Who used your dad's iPad? We know that that's going to be a key element in this trial because after the fact, investigators found searches on Todd Mullis's iPads for a number of very suspect phrases, including what to do with the cheating spouse, organs, and so on and so forth. So what do you think was the point of that extensive questioning on the iPad?
I think what she wanted to develop there was the fact that there was inconsistency in his testimony. Originally, on several occasions, he stated, I've never used that iPad. It's my father's iPad. I don't have any access to it. None of us have ever used it. And then at some point, he stated, well, yes, I did go on a couple of times. And that to me sounds like this is something he's trying to say to protect his father. Maybe his father and he had a conversation. Maybe the father knew that this would come up. And so, in sense, the son here is trying to give the father a little wiggle room. So yeah, it's very suspect if you ask me.
Yeah, some of those searches that investigators found on Todd Mullis's iPad were organs in the body, killing unfaithful women, and what happened to cheating spouses in historic Aztec tribes. Certainly some interesting search phrases here, and maybe a challenge for the defense to explain. Speaking of the defense, how do you expect the cross-examination of Tristan will go after the lunch break?
I think that cross-examination is going to try to say that, the son has no reason to lie, that he was upset when he found the body, and that the father and he tried very hard to save, his mother, that they rushed to take her to the hospital and tried to do CPR. But I think that, defense is going to have a hard time. There was no one else on the farm. It was only the father and the son, and, maybe the other two children were in the house, but obviously much younger. And it will be very difficult to establish that someone else here was involved. And obviously, there's a motive as far as the father is concerned in terms of the affair that apparently occurred with the wife.
Right, and we heard Tristan say, yes, he was aware that his mother had had an affair. Yeah, it is going to be interesting because really today, this was an interesting turn of events. All along, we have expected the defense to argue that this was an accident, that perhaps Amy Mullis fell on that rake. But we know that explanation didn't necessarily match up because she had 6 marks on her back and the rake had 4 prongs. Well, now the defense came out today in their opening statement and said she was brutally murdered, just not by Todd Mullis. And he said this isn't about determining who murdered her, just determining that Todd Mullis did not. We'll see whether they can be effective in that. But before we go back and revisit some of those openings, how unusual is it for either side really to suddenly come up with a brand new theory at opening arguments when previous to this and in the press and elsewhere other explanations have been given?
Yes, that's going to be hard for them to substantiate. It's either an accident or it's a murder. And I think the defense realizes that there are different numbers of holes in her body. So if the rake only has 4 prongs and she has 6 prongs, it's clear that this is not an accident. And, I don't know historically how many people have ever fallen on a rake, but I would think that it would be pretty difficult to fall on a rake. So that story doesn't hold much water anyway. So I can see why they might want to change their story to say that it was murder because of the discrepancy in the number of holes. But the difficulty there, Stacey, is who did it. If no one else was there and, the prosecution established that there was no one else on the farm, then it's going to be hard to say someone else came in and murdered the wife. And what would the motive be?
Absolutely. Well, let's go back to the opening arguments, which just took place a couple of hours ago this morning. And we'll start with the prosecution. Let's listen to how they set up their case against Todd Mullis. Okay, so that was just the beginning of how the defense laid out what they say happened. The defense attorney went on to say that somebody else brutally murdered Amy Mullis, but it wasn't her husband, Todd. It will be interesting to see how they can prove that. I want to bring back in Terri Austin quickly, Terri, to get your comments on the prosecution's opening statement first, because, wow, that was quick. 5 minutes or less, she was done. She laid it all out. This guy did it. He's the murderer. He earned his seat here. She did not mince words. Was that an effective opening argument?
I think it was, Stacey, because you want to be short, you want to be succinct, you want to have a story, and she told her story. I think when you belabor over the details and you get too long into what the story was, the jury is kind of thrown off. I think she's established the fact that there was a motive here. I think she's established the foundation that there was no one else on the farm. And I thought she did a great job, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that sometimes we hear these openings stretch on for an hour or longer, and you can start to get lost in the details, especially so early on in the case. In this case, I mean, as you said, she sort of hit the key points. No one else was on the farm, and she talked about the motive. I mean, how important is this motive going to be? We know that Amy Mullis had 2 affairs over the course of the couple's marriage. The most recent one had just been going on, and we know that she had told friends that she feared if her husband found out he would hurt her or do worse. So how important is that motive going to be here?
I think the motive is very important. It's interesting because people kill for different reasons, money, maybe there's an affair going on, but here I think she's established, there could be some financial gain here, but more importantly, there's the motive that she had an affair. And there's all of this forensic evidence about how to kill a cheating wife, which always surprises me when someone is contemplating a murder. It's clear that you're going to leave this sort of trail, and they have him researching, or at least it's on the iPad.
They always think, no one will ever find it. I can erase my search history. Terri, thank you so much for being with us. As always, we do appreciate your insight. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, much more live from this trial and the other big trial we're following out of Florida. Stay with us. We'll be right back.